The air in the Kandar Valley was a thick, grainy soup of pulverized rock and sun-baked earth. It coated everything: the inside of her nostrils, the grit between her teeth, the fine layer on her combat boots. Sergeant Maya Doc Velez wasn't just a medic. She was an artist of triage in chaos. Her hands, nimble and precise, could stitch a gaping wound in the dark or set a fractured bone under a hail of gunfire. But on paper, and in the unspoken hierarchy of the platoon, she was just a medic. She carried a standard-issue M4. But it felt less like a weapon and more like a heavy piece of equipment she was responsible for. Her true gear, her tools of the trade, were the scalpels, tourniquets, and 4 bags packed into her aid bag, a canvas of life and death slung across her back. Her world was not about taking lives, but about clinging to them, one desperate, bloody second at a time. Their current objective, Operation Cerberus, was a straightforward snatch. A key insurgent leader, codenamed Scylla, was holed up in a mudbrick compound in the heart of the valley. Their team, a mixed unit of Army Rangers and a small, elite CAL detachment led by Commander Hayes, was tasked with getting in, securing the target, and getting out before the hornet's nest stirred. Commander Hayes was a legend in the Special Operations community. He was a man carved from granite and logic, his every action deliberate and final. Hayes didn't show emotion, but Velez had seen a flicker of something in his eyes, a respect that went beyond professional courtesy. Still, she sensed the invisible line between them. He was a door kicker, a trigger puller, she was a patch-up artist. The walk-in was hellish. A grueling 10-mile march through jagged terrain that seemed designed to shred the soles of their boots. Velez kept a steady pace, her eyes scanning for sprains and signs of heat exhaustion. The sun beat down, turning the air into an oven. As they neared the compound, the wind shifted, carrying the faint, acrid smell of burning dung and the distant sound of goat bells. 200 meters, Hayes's voice, a low rumble, crackled over the comms. Eyes open. This feels too quiet. It was, the compound, nestled against a steep rock face, was eerily still. There were no patrols, no lookouts. The silence was the worst kind, the kind that hummed with the potential for violence. Ballas's heart hammered a rhythm against her ribs, a frantic little drumbeat she had long learned to ignore. Her focus narrowed to her kit, running through her mental checklist one last time. She was ready for the inevitable. She was ready to be a medic. Part 2. The ambush. The first shot was a clean, sharp crack that seemed to split the very air. It wasn't a pop or a thud, but the precise, terrifying sound of a sniper round. It struck the ranger point man, a young corporal named Finn, with a wet, sickening thud. He went down hard, his body twisting in an unnatural way as he fell behind the meager cover of a gnarled fig tree. Then, the world erupted. From the high ground, from the compound walls, from a hidden bunker carved into the rock, FISA symphony of death began to play. The rattle of AK-47 fire, the thump of rocket-propelled grenades, the distinctive chug of a PKM machine gun. It was a well-planned, comprehensive ambush. They weren't just being pinned down, they were being boxed in. Contact, right? Heavy fire from the ridge. A voice screamed over the comms. Get down, get down. Hayes bellowed, his voice cutting through the din. He was already directing fire, his own M4 barking in short, controlled bursts. Velez hit the ground, her face pressed against the dusty earth. Her mind, however, was already in motion. She could hear the shouts for a medic, the desperate cries of pain. Finn was down, and she could see the blood blooming on the front of his vest. He was in bad shape. She crawled, low and fast, the weight of her aid bag feeling like 100 pounds. Bullets whizzed over her head, kicking up little geysers of dust. The air was a maelstrom of sound and fury. Reaching Finn, she ignored the chaos and focused on the task. His breathing was shallow, his eyes wide with shock. A large caliber round had hit him in the chest, right where his armor plate met the soft tissue of his shoulder. It had missed the plate, but the impact had shattered his clavicle and likely punctured a lung. "Stay with me, Finn," she murmured, her voice calm despite the pandemonium. She ripped his sleeve open, her fingers moving with impossible speed. She applied a chest seal to the wound, a temporary fix to stop the sucking chest wound and buy him time. She worked through the pain, through the screams, through the sheer terror of the situation. She was in her element, but it was an element built on suffering. While she worked, a voice she knew well came on the comms, panicked and urgent. It was Specialist Chen, the team's designated heavy gunner, his voice strained and high-pitched. "Commander, I'm out. Jammed. My saw is jammed. I can't clear it. We're taking fire from that bunker. It's a PKM. It's got us pinned." Valez finished her work on Finn, her hands stained with his blood. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. The SEALs were trying to suppress the machine gun nest with their M4 South, but it was like trying to stop a tidal wave with a picket fence. The PKM had the high ground and the perfect angle. They were trapped. Commander Hayes was positioned a few yards away, behind a crumbling stone wall. He was shouting orders, his face a mask of furious concentration. His own weapon was firing, but it wasn't having the desired effect. They needed a bigger gun, something with enough punch to penetrate the bunker walls and silence the nest. They needed the .50 cal, Part 3, the handoff. The SEALs had a heavy machine gun, a Barrett M82, 50 caliber sniper rifle, a beast of a weapon used for long-range interdiction and anti-materiel roles. It was meant to be their overwatch, but the ambush had been too swift. The shooter, an imposing SEAL named Hammer, had been pinned down in a rocky depression, his position impossible to use. The commander, however, had the Barrett. He was its primary operator for this mission. He had set it up against the wall, its long barrel resting on a sandbag. He fired a couple of rounds, the thunderous boom of the rifle making the earth tremble. The rounds tore through the mud bricks of the compound wall, a testament to the sheer power of the weapon, but it was not enough to silence the PKM nest. The enemy fire was relentless. Suddenly, a dull thud, followed by a grunt of pain. A grenade, it had landed a few feet from Commander Hayes. He threw himself to the side, his body absorbing the concussive force. Velez saw it from her position near Finn. The commander was still alive, but he was disoriented, his arm limp at his side. He tried to stand, but his legs wobbled. He was out of the fight, for now. The PKM opened up again, and a few stray rounds whizzed dangerously close to Hayes. They were about to lose their command, their primary heavy weapon, and their last chance to break the enemy's hold on the battlefield. That's when it happened. Hayes, his face contorted in pain and frustration, looked up. He saw Maya, her aid bag slung across her back, her face streaked with dirt and blood, her hands covered in the same. He saw her competence, her calm under pressure. He saw her, not as just a medic, but as the only person who was not pinned down, and the only person close enough to the rifle. He looked at her, and his eyes, usually a cold calculating gray, held a desperate plea. He gestured to the Barrett, then to the PKM nest. He couldn't form the words, he didn't need to. The message was clear. Volez stared. The .50 cal. The monster. The one-shot one-kill weapon. It was an instrument of war. A symbol of destruction. The very antithesis of everything she was trained to do. The fear, the disbelief, the sheer audacity of the request threatened to paralyze her. Her mind screamed in protest. I'm a medic. I save people. I don't tire things like that. But then, she looked at the faces of her team, pinned down, taking casualties, their faces etched with fear. She looked at the blood on her hands. She looked at Finn, his breathing ragged. She looked at Commander Hayes, his face pale with pain. The only way to save them was to stop the man with the PKM. The only way to stop him was to use the most destructive tool at their disposal. The only way to save lives was to take one. She pushed herself to her feet, moving low and fast. The sound of the battle was a distant roar, her world narrowing to the distance between her and the commander. She reached him, her hands going to his arm. I'm okay, Doc, he grunted, his voice hoarse. The rifle, he nodded at the Barrett. He was right. There was no time for him, not now. The team was her patient, and the PKM was the disease. She knelt beside the rifle, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm. She had never fired anything like it. She had trained on an M4, but this was a different animal entirely. I don't know. She started. Just pull the trigger, Volez Hayes said, his voice firm, his eyes locked on hers. It's point and shoot. You're a good shot, you can do it. His faith in her, a quiet, simple, powerful thing, was all she needed. She took a breath, pushed the panic down, and wrapped her hands around the rifle. Part 4. The trigger pull. The Barrett was a monstrous thing. It was cold to the touch, heavy and unforgiving. The buttstock was massive, a solid block of metal and rubber, meant to absorb the tremendous recoil. The sight picture was a simple crosshair, but the world through the scope seemed to magnify the chaos, bringing the enemy positions into sharp, horrifying focus. She took a knee behind the makeshift wall, her body trembling with a mixture of adrenaline and fear. She had to steady herself. Her hands, so used to the delicate work of sutures and bandages, now felt clumsy and weak. She laid her cheek against the cold steel of the stock, her eyes squinting through the scope. The PKM nest was about 150 meters away. She could see the muzzle flash, a brief, angry flicker against the stone. She could see the gunner himself, a dark shape against the dusty backdrop, his shoulders shaking with the recoil of his own weapon. A cold, analytical part of her brain took over. It was the same part that calculated dosages, that assessed vital signs, that knew exactly where to place a tourniquet to stop the bleeding. It was her medic's mind, now repurposed for violence. She had to stop him. She had to save her team. Her finger, hesitant at first, found the trigger. She had to get the first shot right. There was no room for error. She steadied her breath, exhaling slowly, her lungs feeling too tight. The crosshairs settled on the gunner's chest. The weapon was zeroed in. She just had to pull. Her finger flexed. Boom. The sound was a physical thing, a deafening thunderclap that vibrated through her teeth and rattled her bones. The recoil was a violent, savage push against her shoulder, a powerful jolt that threatened to knock her over. Her body was not prepared for it. She grunted in pain, her vision blurring for a second. She had missed. The bullet, a screaming projectile the size of her thumb, had impacted just to the left of the bunker opening, kicking up a shower of rock and dust. The gunner was a little too far to the right. The muzzle flash of the PKM was a brief, defiant taunt. Panic flared. The SEALs were still pinned down, and she had just announced her presence to the entire enemy force. She had to try again, and she had to be faster. She forced herself to breathe. Hayes's words echoed in her mind. "You're a good shot." He knew she could do it. She had to trust him, and more importantly, she had to trust herself. She reset her position, her muscles tensed, ready for the impact. She reacquired the target, the scope picture coming back into focus. This time, she didn't just aim for the center of his chest. She aimed for the muzzle of the PKM itself, a smaller target, but a more direct way to end the threat. Another slow breath out. The crosshairs found their mark. Boom. This time the recoil was expected. She braced for it, her shoulder tensed, her body ready. The monstrous kick of the rifle hit her, but she held her position. Her eye never left the scope. The bullet struck home. There was a shower of sparks, a screech of tearing metal, and then silence. The PKM's barrel was gone. The gunner was a crumpled mess, his body flung back into the bunker wall. The relentless chatter of the machine gun was finally blessedly over. A collective sigh seemed to ripple through the team, though no one was close enough to hear it. The immediate, suffocating threat was gone. The world seemed to stop spinning for a moment. Velez lowered the rifle, her arms aching, her ears ringing. She was shaking, but not from fear. From the shock of what she had just done. She had saved them. Part 5. The aftermath and the new reality. The enemy fire didn't cease immediately, but it lessened. The loss of their heavy machine gun had broken their momentum. The SEALs and Rangers, now freed from the chokehold, began to return fire with renewed vigor. The tide of the battle had turned. Velez, still kneeling behind the low wall, felt a hand on her shoulder. It was Commander Hayes. He was still in pain, but his eyes were clear, and a hint of a smile, a rare sight, touched the corners of his mouth. "Good work, Velez," he said, his voice low and sincere. "That was a hell of a shot." She just nodded, unable to speak. The image of the gunner, the instant of his death, was still burned into her mind. She had never taken a life before, not in this way. She was a medic. Her purpose was to mend, to heal, to preserve. Now, she had done the opposite. She had ended a life, and in doing so, had preserved many others. The moral paradox was a heavy weight on her soul. The fighting continued for another 15 minutes, but the momentum was with the Allied forces. A Ranger team, now able to move, flanked the enemy positions and took out the remaining resistance. The compound was secured, the threat neutralized. As the dust settled, Velez returned to her duties. She moved from one injured soldier to the next, her hands moving with the familiar rhythm of her trade. She treated a deep laceration on a Ranger's arm, bandaged a nasty shrapnel wound on another, and finally, returned to Finn. He was still alive, his breathing a little more stable. The chest seal she had applied had held. She was just a medic again. But the label felt different now. hollow. She had stepped outside of that role, had crossed a line she never thought she would, and had come back changed. The medics on the team, who had been in the thick of it all, looked at her with a new reverence. They had seen her with the 50 cal, had seen her do what no one else could. Commander Hayes was being treated by another medic for his arm. He caught her eye from across the clearing. His nod was a silent acknowledgement, a wordless conversation that said, "We know. We saw. You're one of us now." He wasn't talking about being a SEAL, but about being a warrior. Part 6. The debrief later that night, back at base. The debriefing room was filled with the low murmur of tired, relieved men. The mission had been a success, thanks to the quick thinking and decisive action of a few individuals. Commander Hayes, his arm in a sling, stood before the room, a map of the valley displayed on a screen behind him. He recounted the ambush, the near disaster, and the turning point. We were pinned down, heavy fire from the ridge. We needed to neutralize that PKM nest, and we needed to do it fast. My arm was gone from the grenade blast, and our heavy gunner was out of the fight. The only available asset was Sergeant Velez. He paused, and the room went quiet. He looked at Maya, who was standing at the back of the room, her shoulders tense. She had cleaned up, but the wariness in her eyes was profound. I handed her the Barrett. She'd never fired it before. Didn't even hesitate. She took 2 shots. The first was a miss, but the second tore the gun right off its mount and neutralized the threat. She saved our lives, gentlemen. She saved this mission. A ripple of murmurs went through the room. They all knew Doc Velez. They knew she was good. But this was a different level entirely. Hayes dismissed the team and waited for Velez to come to him. When she did, he looked at her, his gaze intense. "You okay, Doc?" he asked. "I don't know, sir," she said honestly. I took a life. To save others. It feels wrong." He nodded, understanding her turmoil. "You did what was necessary, Velez. It's part of the job. You're a medic. You save people. But sometimes, saving people means getting your hands dirty." He held up his good arm, gesturing to the sling. "You saved me. You saved the whole team. You didn't just stitch up our wounds. You stopped the bleeding at the source." He was right. She had acted not just as a medic, but as a protector, a guardian. She had used an instrument of death to protect life. The paradox was still there, but it felt less like a heavy burden and more like a testament to her strength. From that day on, things were different. The quiet respect she had once felt from her comrades was replaced by an open admiration. They no longer saw her as just a medic. They saw her as a warrior, a badass in her own right, a person with an aid bag, who could not only bring you back from the brink of death, but also keep you from ever reaching it in the first place. She was no longer just a healer, she was a guardian. And she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her soul, that she would never be just a medic again.